Ever wondered why your heart races when you see a snake, even just a picture of one? Or why do horror movies make you jump even when you know it's all just make-believe? Fear, in all its forms, is an emotion we've all experienced at various points in our lives. It's universal, transcending cultures, languages, and geographical boundaries. From the fear of the dark that grips a child to the fear of failure that haunts an adult, it is an emotion that can provoke powerful reactions. It's not just psychological, it's physical too. That racing heart, the sweaty palms, the adrenaline rush, all of these are tangible manifestations of fear. And yet, despite its universality, fear remains a largely misunderstood emotion. It grips us, controls us, and often dictates our actions. So, fear, it seems, has a powerful hold on us. But where does it come from? And why does it affect us so profoundly? You might be surprised to learn that fear begins in your brain, specifically in an area called the amygdala. This almond-shaped set of neurons, nestled deep within the brain, is our primal alarm system. It's responsible for detecting threats and triggering immediate responses to keep us safe. When a potential danger is perceived, the amygdala springs into action. It sends out a distress signal to the rest of the brain, setting off a chain reaction designed to prepare our bodies for the classic fight-or-flight response. It's like an internal fire alarm, designed to alert us to potential danger and help us survive. Once the amygdala has sounded the alarm, the hypothalamus, the command center of the brain, takes over. It signals the adrenal glands to release hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. These hormones flood our bodies, readying us to either confront the perceived threat or to run away from it as fast as possible. Adrenaline increases heart rate, blood pressure, and energy supplies. It dilates the airways, allowing more oxygen to reach the brain and muscles, enhancing physical performance. Cortisol suppresses non-emergency bodily functions like the immune response and digestion, curbs functions that would be non-essential in a fight-or-flight situation, and enhances the body's ability to repair tissues. These hormones also trigger a number of physical symptoms that we typically associate with fear. You know, the ones that make you feel like you've just run a marathon, even though you've barely moved. A racing heart, quickened breathing, sweaty palms, and even a dry mouth. These are all part of your body's natural response to fear, preparing you to either face the danger or flee from it. But the amygdala doesn't always get it right. Sometimes it can misinterpret situations, triggering this intense reaction to things that aren't actually threats. This is where phobias and anxiety disorders can come into play. But that's a topic for another time. So that's the biology of fear. But what about the psychology? What's happening in our minds when we feel afraid? Fear isn't just a physical response. It's also a psychological one, deeply rooted in our perceptions and experiences. So how does our mind play a role in fear? Well, it all starts with something called conditioning. Conditioning is a learning process in which behavior is shaped and maintained by its consequences. This is how we learn to associate certain situations, objects, or experiences with fear. For example, if you've ever been bitten by a dog, your mind might now associate dogs with pain and danger, leading to a fear of dogs. This is known as learned fear. But fear isn't always based on our own experiences. Sometimes it's learned from others. This is called observational fear learning. For instance, if you see someone else being bitten by a dog, you might develop a fear of dogs even though you've never been bitten yourself. Now, what's particularly fascinating about fear is that it's not always grounded in reality. Sometimes we fear things not because they pose an actual threat, but because we perceive them as threatening. This is known as perceived fear. Perceived fear can be influenced by a range of factors, including our own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, as well as societal and cultural norms. Let's take the fear of public speaking, for example. Standing up in front of a crowd doesn't pose a physical danger, but many of us fear it because we perceive it as threatening. We worry about being judged, making mistakes, or not living up to expectations. This fear is not based on a real threat, but on our perception of the situation. In summary, fear can be learned through experiences or conditioned over time. It can be a response to real threats, but also to perceived ones. It's a complex interplay of biology and psychology, a dance between the body and the mind. Fear, then, is both a biological and psychological phenomenon. But what can we do about it? Can we control our fears? Fear can seem overwhelming, but the good news is we can learn to control and manage it. Now, let's delve into the realm of fear control and management. The first line of defense against fear is understanding it, which we've already covered in our previous sections. Now, it's time to talk about the strategies you can employ to keep fear from ruling your life. One of the most effective techniques for managing fear is cognitive behavioral therapy, often shortened to CBT. This form of therapy helps us understand the thoughts and feelings that influence our behaviors, particularly those that induce fear. CBT allows us to reframe our fear, turning it from an overwhelming monster into a manageable challenge. It's about changing the narrative in our minds and understanding that fear is a natural response, not a dictator of our actions. Mindfulness, another powerful tool, invites us to live in the present moment. Instead of getting tangled up in the what-ifs of the future or the should-haves of the past, mindfulness encourages us to focus on the here and now. It's about acknowledging our fears without letting them consume us. By focusing on our breathing, the sensations in our bodies, or the world around us, we can create a buffer between us and our fear, providing a moment of calm in the storm of anxiety. Then there's exposure therapy. While it may sound intimidating, it's actually a gradual process of facing the things that scare us. It's not about throwing ourselves into our deepest fears head first, but rather taking small, manageable steps towards them. With each confrontation, we reduce fear's power over us, proving to ourselves that we are stronger than our fear. While these strategies may not eliminate fear entirely, they can help us manage it effectively. Understand that it's okay to feel fear. It's a part of being human. But it's also important to remember that fear doesn't have to control our actions. We have the power to take charge. While fear can be debilitating, with understanding and the right strategies, it doesn't have to control our lives. So, we've taken a deep dive into the world of fear. We've learned about its biological and psychological roots and how we can manage it. This journey has been enlightening, hasn't it? We've unraveled the threads of fear, pulling apart its components to better understand its influence on our lives. Let's take a moment to revisit the key insights we've uncovered. We started with the provocation of fear, peering into its root causes. We discovered that fear is a primal emotion, an instinctual response to perceived threats. It's a survival mechanism, hardwired into our DNA, to keep us safe from harm. We moved on to the biology of fear, where we explored how fear is processed in our brains and bodies. We learned that it begins in the amygdala, the part of our brain that triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction ripples out, causing our hearts to pound, our breath to quicken, and our senses to heighten. Next, we delved into the psychology of fear. We learned that fear isn't just a physical response, it has a profound psychological impact as well. It can influence our behavior, shape our beliefs, and even alter our perception of reality. Fear can be a powerful motivator, but it can also be a crippling obstacle. Then we discussed strategies for controlling fear. We discovered that understanding fear is the first step towards managing it. We can use techniques like mindfulness, cognitive restructuring, and exposure therapy to challenge our fears and change our reaction to them. We also learned that professional help is available and can be invaluable in overcoming deep-seated or debilitating fears. But most importantly, we learned that fear is not something to be ashamed of. It's a universal experience, shared by every living creature. It's a part of who we are, a part of our evolutionary heritage. Recognizing and acknowledging our fears doesn't make us weak. On the contrary, it makes us human. We've come a long way in our understanding of fear. But remember, knowledge is only the first step. The real challenge lies in applying this knowledge, in using these tools to confront and manage our fears. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's absolutely possible. And the rewards are worth it. A life less ruled by fear and more filled with peace, courage, and resilience. So, where do we go from here? Well, that's up to you. This exploration of fear doesn't have to end here. Keep learning, keep exploring, keep challenging your fears. Because the more you understand about fear, the less power it has over you. Remember, fear is a part of life, but it doesn't have to control you. With understanding and the right tools, you can learn to manage your fears and live a more peaceful life. Subscribe and don't forget to take care of yourselves. Goodbye.